Chapter 39 of The Trumpet-Major. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Simon Evers. The Trumpet-Major by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 39. Bob Loveday struts up and down. One night, about a week later, two men were walking in the dark along the turnpike road towards Overcombe, one of them with a bag in his hand. "Now," said the taller of the two, the squareness of whose shoulders signified that he wore epaulets, "now you must do the best you can for yourself, Bob. I have done all I can, but thou hast thy work cut out, I can tell thee." "I wouldn't have run such a risk for the world," said the other, in a tone of ingenuous contrition. "But thou see, Jack, I didn't think there was any danger, knowing you was taking care of her and keeping my place warm for me. I didn't hurry myself, that's true, but thinks I, if I gets this promotion, I'm promised I shall naturally have leave, and then I'll go and see 'em all. Gad, I shouldn't have been here now but for your letter." "You little think what risks you've run," said his brother. "However, try to make up for lost time." "All right. And whatever you do, Jack, don't say a word about this other girl. Hang the girl, I was a great fool, I know. Still, it's over now, and I'm come to my senses. I suppose Anne never caught a capful of wind from that quarter?" "She knows all about it," said John seriously. "Knows? By George, then I'm ruined," said Bob, standing stock still in the road as if he meant to remain there all night. "That's what I mean by saying that it would be a hard battle for 'ee," returned John with the same quietness as before. Bob sighed and moved on. "I don't deserve that woman," he cried passionately, thumping his 3 upper ribs with his fist. "I've thought as much myself," observed John, with a dryness which was almost bitter. "But it depends on how thou'st behaved in future." "John," said Bob, taking his brother's hand, "I'll be a new man. I solemnly swear by that eternal milestone staring at me there, that I'll never look at another woman with the thought of marrying her whilst that darling is free. No, not if she be a mermaiden of light. It's a lucky thing that I'm slipped in on that quarter-deck. It may help me with her, eh?" "It may with her mother. I don't think it will make much difference with Anne. Still, it is a good thing, and I hope that some day you'll command a big ship." Bob shook his head. "Officers are scarce, but I'm afraid my luck won't carry me so far as that." "Did she ever tell you that she mentioned your name to the king?" The seaman stood still again. "Never," he said. "How did such a thing as that happen, in heaven's name?" John described in detail, and they walked on, lost in conjecture. As soon as they entered the house, the returned officer of the navy was welcomed with acclamation by his father and David, with mild approval by Mrs. Loveday, and by Anne not at all, that discreet maiden having carefully retired to her own room some time earlier in the evening. Bob did not dare to ask for her in any positive manner. He just inquired about her health, and that was all. "Well, what's the matter with thy face, my son?" said the miller, staring. "David, show a light here." And a candle was thrust against Bob's cheek, where there appeared a jagged streak like the geological remains of a lobster. "Oh, that's where that rascally Frenchman's grenade busted and hit me from the redoubtable, you know, as I told 'ee in my letter." "Not a word." "What, didn't I tell 'ee?" "No, I meant to, but I forgot it." "And here's a sort of dint in your forehead, too. What does that mean, my dear boy?" said the miller, putting his finger in a chasm in Bob's skull. "That were done in the Indies. Yes, that was rather a troublesome chop. A cutlass did it. I should have told you, but I found 'twould make my letter so long that I put it off, and at last I thought it wasn't worth while." John soon rose to take his departure. "It's all up with me and her, you see," said Bob to him outside the door. "She's not even going to see me." "Wait a little," said the Trumpet-Major. It was easy enough on the night of the arrival, in the midst of excitement, when blood was warm, for Anne to be resolute in her avoidance of Bob Loveday. But in the morning determination is apt to grow invertebrate, rules of pugnacity are less easily acted up to, and a feeling of live and let live takes possession of the gentle soul. Anne had not meant even to sit down to the same breakfast table with Bob. But when the rest were assembled and had got some way through the substantial repast which was served at this hour in the miller's house, Anne entered. She came silently as a phantom, her eyes cast down, her cheeks pale. It was a good long walk from the door to the table, and Bob made a full inspection of her as she came up to a chair at the remotest corner, in the direct rays of the morning light, where she dumbly sat herself down. It was altogether different from how she had expected. Here was she who had done nothing, feeling all the embarrassment, and Bob, who had done the wrong, feeling apparently quite at ease. "You'll speak to Bob, won't you, honey?" said the miller, after a silence. To meet Bob like this after an absence seemed irregular in his eyes. "If he wished me to," she replied, so addressing the miller that no part, scrap, or outlying beam whatever of her glance passed near the subject of her remark. "He's a lieutenant, you know, dear," said her mother on the same side, "and he's been dreadfully wounded." "Oh," said Anne, turning a little towards the false one, at which Bob felt it to be time for him to put in a spoke for himself. "I'm glad to see you," he said contritely. And how do you do?" "Very well, thank you." He extended his hand. She allowed him to take hers, but only to the extent. At the same moment she glanced up at him, when their eyes met, and hers were again withdrawn. The hitch between the two younger members of the household tended to make the breakfast a dull one. Bob was so depressed by her unforgiving manner that he could not throw that sparkle into his stories which their substance naturally required. And when the meal was over, and they went about their different businesses, the pair resembled the two Dromios in seldom or never being, thanks to Anne's subtle contrivances, both in the same room at the same time. This kind of performance repeated itself during several days. At last, after dogging her hither and thither, leaning with a wrinkled forehead against door-posts, taking an oblique view into the room where she happened to be, picking out worsted balls and getting no thanks, placing a splinter from the Victory, several bullets from the Redoubtable, a strip of the flag, and other interesting relics carefully labelled, upon her table, and hearing no more about them than if they had been pebbles from the nearest brook, he hit upon a new plan. To avoid him, she frequently sat upstairs in a window overlooking the garden. Lieutenant Loveday carefully dressed himself in a new uniform, which he had caused to be sent some days before to dazzle admiring friends, but which he had never as yet put on in public or mentioned to a soul. When arrayed, he entered the sunny garden, and there walked slowly up and down as he had seen Nelson and Captain Hardy do on the quarter-deck, but keeping his right shoulder, on which his one epaulet was fixed, as much towards Anne's window as possible. But she made no sign, though there was not the least question that she saw him. At the end of half an hour he went in, took off his clothes, and gave himself up to doubt and the best tobacco. He repeated the programme on the next afternoon, and on the next, never saying a word within doors about his doings or his notice. Meanwhile, the results in Anne's chamber were not uninteresting. She had been looking out on the first day, and was duly amazed to see a naval officer in full uniform promenading in the path. Finding it to be Bob, she left the window with a sense that the scene was not for her. Then, from mere curiosity, peeping out from behind the curtain. When he was a pretty spectacle, she admitted, relieved as his figure was by a dense mass of sunny, close-trimmed hedge, over which nasturtiums climbed in wild luxuriance. And if she could care for him one bit, which she couldn't, his form would have been a delightful study, surpassing in interest even its splendour on the memorable day of their visit to the town theatre. She called her mother. Mrs. Loveday came promptly. "Oh, it is nothing," said Anne indifferently, "only that Bob has got his uniform." Mrs. Loveday peeped out and raised her hands with delight. "And he's not said a word to us about it. What a lovely epaulette! I must call his father." "No, indeed. As I take no interest in him, I shall not let people come into my room to admire him." "Well, you called me," said her mother. "It was because I thought you liked fine clothes. It's what I don't care for." Notwithstanding this assertion, she again looked out at Bob the next afternoon when his footsteps rustled on the gravel, and studied his appearance under all the varying angles of the sunlight, as if fine clothes and uniforms were not altogether a matter of indifference. He certainly was a splendid, gentlemanly, and gallant saver from end to end of him. But then, what were a dashing presentiment, a naval rank, and telling scars, if a man was fickle-hearted? However, she peeped on till the 4th day, and then she did not peep. The window was open, she looked right out, and Bob knew that he had got a rise to his bait at last. He touched his hat to her, keeping his right shoulder forwards, and said, "Good day, Miss Garland," with a smile. Anne replied, "Good day," with a funereal seriousness, and the acquaintance thus revived led to the interchange of a few words at supper-time, at which Mrs. Loveday nodded with satisfaction. But Anne took especial care that he should never meet her alone, and to ensure this her ingenuity was in constant exercise. There were so many nooks and windings on the miller's rambling premises that she could never be sure he would not turn up within a foot of her, particularly as his thin shoes were almost noiseless. One fine afternoon she accompanied Molly in search of elderberries for making the family wine, which was drunk by Mrs. Loveday, Anne, and anybody who could not stand the rougher and stronger liquors provided by the miller. After walking rather a long distance over the down, they came to a grassy hollow, where elder bushes in knots of 2s and 3s rose from an uneven bank and hung their heads towards the south, black and heavy with bunches of fruit. The charm of fruit-gathering to girls is enhanced in the case of elderberries by the inoffensive softness of the leaves, boughs, and bark, which makes getting into the branches easy and pleasant to the most indifferent climbers. Anne and Molly had soon gathered a basketful, and, sending the servants home with it, Anne remained in the bush, picking and throwing down bunch by bunch upon the grass. She was so absorbed in her occupation of pulling the twigs towards her, and the rustling of their leaves so filled her ears, that it was a great surprise when, on turning her head, she perceived a similar movement to her own among the boughs of the adjoining bush. At first she thought they were disturbed by being partly in contact with the boughs of her bush, but in a moment Robert Loveday's face peered from them, at a distance of about a yard from her own. Anne uttered a little indignant "Well!" recovered herself, and went on plucking. Bob thereupon went on plucking likewise. "I'm picking elderberries for your mother," said the lieutenant at last, humbly. "So I see." "And I happen to have come to the next bush to yours." "So I see, but not the reason why." Anne was now in the westernmost branches of the bush, and Bob had leant across into the eastern branches of his. In gathering, he swayed towards her, back again, forward again. "I beg pardon," he said, when a further swing than usual had taken him almost in contact with her. "Then why do you do it?" The wind rocks the bough, and the bough rocks me." She expressed by her look her opinion of this statement in the face of the gentlest breeze, and Bob pursued, "I'm afraid the berries will stain your pretty hands." "I wear gloves." That's a plan I should never have thought of. Can I help you?" "Not at all." "You're offended, that's what that means." "No," she said. "Then will you shake hands?" Anne hesitated, then slowly stretched out her hand, which he took at once. "That will do," she said, finding that he did not relinquish it immediately. But as he still held it, she pulled, the effect of which was to draw Bob's swaying person, bough and all, towards her, and herself towards him. "I am afraid to let go your hand," said that officer, "for if I do, your spar will fly back, and you will be thrown upon the deck with great violence." "I wish you to let me go." He accordingly did, and she flew back, but did not by any means fall. "It reminds me of the times when I used to be aloft, clinging to a yard not much bigger than this tree-stem in the mid-Atlantic, and thinking about you. I could see you in my fancy as plain as I see you now." "Me or some other woman," retorted Anne haughtily. "No," declared Bob, shaking the bush for emphasis. "I'll protest that I did not think of anybody but you all the time we were dropping down Channel, all the time we were off Cadiz, all the way through battles and bombardments. I seemed to see you in the smoke, and thinks I, if I go to Davy's locker, what will she do?" "You didn't think that when you landed after Trafalgar." "Well now," said the lieutenant in a reasoning tone, "that was a curious thing. You'll hardly believe it, maybe, but when a man is away from the woman he loves best in the port world, I mean, he can have a sort of temporary feeling for another, without disturbing the old one, which flows along under the same as ever." "I can't believe it, and I won't," said Anne firmly. Molly now appeared with the empty basket, and when it had been filled from the heap on the grass, Anne went home with her, bidding Loveday a frigid adieu. The same evening, when Bob was absent, the miller proposed that they should all three go to an upper window of the house to get a distant view of some rockets and illuminations which were to be exhibited in the town and harbour in honour of the king, who had returned this year as usual. They accordingly went upstairs to an empty attic, placed chairs against the window, and put out the light, Anne sitting in the middle, her mother close by, and the miller behind, smoking. No sign of any pyrotechnic display was visible over the port as yet, and Mrs. Loveday passed the time by talking to the miller, who replied in monosyllables. While this was going on, Anne fancied that she heard some one approach, and presently felt sure that Bob was drawing near her in the surrounding darkness. But as the other two had noticed nothing, she said not a word. All at once the swarthy expanse of southward sky was broken by the blaze of several rockets simultaneously ascending from different ships in the roads. At the very same moment a warm, mysterious hand slipped round her own, and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Oh dear!" said Anne, with a sudden start away. "How nervous you are, child, to be startled by fireworks so far off," said Mrs. Loveday. "I never saw rockets before," murmured Anne, recovering from her surprise. Mrs. Loveday presently spoke again. "I wonder what's become of Bob." Anne did not reply, being much exercised in trying to get her hand away from the one that imprisoned it, and whatever the miller thought he kept to himself, because it disturbed his smoking to speak. Another batch of rockets went up. "Oh, I never," said Anne in a half-suppressed tone, springing in her chair. A second hand had, with the rise of the rockets, leapt round her waist. "Poor girl, you certainly must have change of scene at this rate," said Mrs. Loveday. I suppose I must," murmured the dutiful daughter. For some minutes nothing further occurred to disturb Anne's serenity. Then a slow, quiet came from the obscurity of the apartment. "What, Barb, how long have you been there?" inquired Mrs. Loveday. "Not long," said the lieutenant coolly. "I heard you were all here, and crept up quietly, not to disturb ye." "Why don't you wear heels to your shoes like Christian people, and not creep about so like a cat?" "Well, it keeps your floors clean to go slipshod." "That's true." Meanwhile Anne was gently but firmly trying to pull Bob's arm from her waist, her distressful difficulty being that in freeing her waist she enslaved her hand, and in getting her hand free she enslaved her waist. Finding the struggle a futile one, owing to the invisibility of her antagonist and her wish to keep its nature secret from the other two, she arose, and saying that she did not care to see any more, felt her way downstairs. Bob followed, leaving Loveday and his wife to themselves. "Dear Anne," he began, when he got down and saw her in the candle-light of the large room. But she adroitly passed out at the other door, at which he took a candle and followed her to the small room. "Dear Anne, do let me speak," he repeated, as soon as the rays revealed her figure. But she passed into the bakehouse before he could say more, whereupon he perseveringly did the same. Looking round for her here, he perceived her at the end of the room, where there was no means of exit whatever. "Dear Anne," he began again, setting down the candle. "You must try to forgive me, really you must. I love you the best of anybody in the wide, wide world. Try to forgive me. Come." And he imploringly took her hand. Anne's bosom began to surge and fall like a small tide, her eyes remaining fixed upon the floor, till, when Loveday ventured to draw her slightly towards him, she burst out crying. "I don't like you, Bob. I don't," she suddenly exclaimed between her sobs. "I did once, but I don't now. I can't. You've been very cruel to me." She violently turned away, weeping. I've been terribly bad, I know," answered Bob, conscience-stricken by her grief. "But if you could only forgive me, I promise that I'll never do anything to grieve you again. Do you forgive me, Anne?" Anne's only reply was crying and shaking her head. "Let's make it up. Come, say we've made it up, dear." She withdrew her hand, and, still keeping her eyes buried in her handkerchief, said, "No." "Very well, then," exclaimed Bob, with sudden determination. "Now I know my doom, and whatever you hear of as happening to me, mind this, you cruel girl, that it is all your causing." Saying this, he strode with a hasty tread across the room into the passage and out at the door, slamming it loudly behind him. Anne suddenly looked up from her handkerchief, and stared with round, wet eyes and parted lips at the door by which he had gone. Having remained with suspended breath in this attitude for a few seconds, she turned round, bent her head upon the table, and burst out weeping anew with thrice the violence of the former time. It really seemed now as if her grief would overwhelm her, all the emotions which had been suppressed, bottled up, and concealed since Bob's return having made themselves a sluice at last. But such things have their end, and left to herself in the large, vacant, old apartment, she grew quieter, and at last calm. At length she took the handle and ascended to her bedroom, where she bathed her eyes and looked in the glass to see if she had made herself a dreadful object. It was not so bad as she had expected, and she went downstairs again. Nobody was there, and sitting down she wondered what Bob had really meant by his words. It was too dreadful to think that he intended to go straight away to sea without seeing her again, and frightened at what she had done, she waited anxiously for his return. End of chapter 39. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 40 of The Trumpet-Major. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Simon Evers. The Trumpet-Major by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 40. A Call on Business. Her suspense was interrupted by a very gentle tapping at the door, and then the rustle of a hand over its surface, as if searching for the latch in the dark. The door opened a few inches, and the alabaster face of Uncle Benjy appeared in the slit. "Oh, Squire Derriman, you frighten me." "All alone?" he asked him in a whisper. "My mother and Mr. Loveday are somewhere about the house." "That'll do," he said, coming forward. "I be worrited out of my life, and I have thought of you again, you yourself, dear Anne, and not the miller. If you will only take this and lock it up for a few days till I can find another good place for it. If you only would." And he breathlessly deposited the tin box on the table. "What, obliged to dig it up from the cellar?" "Aye, my nephew hath the scent of the place. How, I don't know, but he and a young woman he's met with are searching everywhere. I worked like a wire drawer to get it up and away while they were scraping in the next cellar. Now where could ye put it, dear? 'Tis only a few documents, and my will, and such like, you know. Poor soul of me, I'm worn out with running and fright." "I'll put it here till I can think of a better place," said Anne, lifting the box. "Dear me, how heavy it is!" Yes, yes," said Uncle Benjy hastily. "The box is iron, you see. However, take care of it, because I'm going to make it worth your while. Ah, you're a good girl, Anne. I wish she was mine." Anne looked at Uncle Benjy. She had known for some time that she possessed all the affection he had to bestow. "Why do you wish that?" she said simply. "Now don't ye argue with me. Where do ye put the coffer?" "Here," said Anne, going to the window-seat, which rose as a flap, disclosing a boxed receptacle beneath, as in many old houses. "'Tis very well for the present," he said dubiously, and they dropped the coffer in, Anne locking down the seat and giving him the key. "Now I don't want ye to be on my side for nothing," he went on. "I never did now, did I? This is for you." He handed her a little packet of paper, which Anne turned over and looked at curiously. "I always meant to do it," continued Uncle Benjy, gazing at the packet as it lay in her hand, and sighing. "Come, open it, my dear. I always meant to do it." She opened it, and found 20 new guineas snugly packed within. "Yes, they are for you. I always meant to do it," he said, sighing again. "But you owe me nothing," returned Anne, holding them out. "Don't say it," cried Uncle Benjy, covering his eyes. "Put 'em away. Well, if you don't want 'em, but put 'em away, dear Anne. They're for you, because you've kept my counsel. Good night to ye. Yes, they're for you." He went a few steps, and turning back, added anxiously, "You won't spend 'em in clothes, or waste 'em in fairings or ornaments of any kind, my dear girl?" "I will not," said Anne. "I wish you would have them." "No, no," said Uncle Benjy, rushing off to escape their shine. But he had got no further than the passage when he returned again. "And you won't lend 'em to anybody, or put 'em into the bank, for no bank is safe in these troublous times. If I was you, I'd keep them exactly as they be, and not spend 'em on any account. Shall I lock 'em into my box for ye?" "Certainly," said she, and the farmer rapidly unlocked the window-bench, opened the box, and locked them in. "It is much the best plan," he said with great satisfaction as he returned the keys to his pocket. "There they will always be safe, you see, and you won't be exposed to temptation." When the old man had been gone a few minutes, the miller and his wife came in, quite unconscious of all that had passed. Anne's anxiety about Bob was again uppermost now, and she spoke but meagrely of old Derriman's visit, and nothing of what he had left. She would fain have asked them if they knew where Bob was, but that she did not wish to inform them of the rupture. She was forced to admit to herself that she had somewhat tried his patience, and that impulsive men had been known to do dark things with themselves at such times. They sat down to supper. The clock ticked rapidly on, and at length the miller said, "Bob's later than usual. Where can he be?" As they both looked at her, she could no longer keep the secret. "It is my fault," she cried. "I have driven him away. What shall I do?" The nature of the quarrel was at once guessed, and her two elders said no more. Anne rose and went to the front door, where she listened for every sound with a palpitating heart. Then she went in, then she went out, and on one occasion she heard the miller say, "I wonder what has passed between Bob and Anne. I hope the chap will come home." Just about this time light footsteps were heard without, and Bob bounced into the passage. Anne, who stood back in the dark while he passed, followed him into the room where her mother and the miller were on the point of retiring to bed, candle in hand. "I've kept ye up, I fear," began Bob cheerily, and apparently without the faintest recollection of his tragic exit from the house. "But the truth on't is, I met with Festus Derriman at the Duke of York as I went from here, and there we have been playing put ever since, not noticing how the time was going. I haven't had a good chat with the fellow for years and years. Really, he is an out-and-out good comrade, a regular hearty. Poor fellow, he's been very badly used. I never heard the rights of the story till now, but it seems that old uncle of his treats him shamefully. He's been hiding away his money, so that poor Fess might not have a farthing, till at last the young man has turned like any other worm, and is now determined to ferret out what he has done with it. The poor young chap hadn't a farthing of ready money till I lent him a couple of guineas, a thing I never did more willingly in my life. But the man was very honourable. 'No, no,' says he, 'don't let me deprive ye.' He's going to marry, and what may you think he's going to do it for?" "For love, I hope," said Anne's mother. "For money, I suppose, since he's so short," said the miller. "No," said Bob, "for spite. He's been badly served, deuced badly served, by a woman. I never heard of a more heartless case in my life. The poor chap won't mention names, but it seems this young woman has trifled with him in all manner of cruel ways, pushed him into the river, tried to steal his horse when he was called out to defend his country, in short, served him rascally. So I gave him the 2 guineas and said, 'Now let's drink to the huzzy's downfall.'" "Oh," said Anne, having approached behind him. Bob turned and saw her, and at the same moment Mr. and Mrs. Loveday discreetly retired by the other door. "Is it peace?" he asked tenderly. "Oh, yes," she anxiously replied. "I didn't mean to make you think I had no heart." At this Bob inclined his countenance towards hers. "No," she said, smiling through 2 incipient tears as she drew back. "You are to show good behaviour for 6 months, and you must promise not to frighten me again by running off when I show you how badly you have served me." "I am yours obedient in anything," cried Bob. "But am I pardoned?" Youth is foolish, and does a woman often let her reasoning in favour of the worthier stand in the way of her perverse desire for the less worthy at such times as these? She murmured some soft words, ending with, "Do you repent?" It would be superfluous to transcribe Bob's answer. Footsteps were heard without. "Oh, begad, I forgot," said Bob. "He's waiting out there for a light." "Who?" "My friend Derriman." "But, Bob, I have to explain." But Festus had by this time entered the lobby, and Anne, with a hasty "Get rid of him at once," vanished upstairs. Here she waited and waited, but Festus did not seem inclined to depart, and at last, foreboding some collision of interests from Bob's new friendship for this man, she crept into a storeroom which was over the apartment into which Loveday and Festus had gone. By looking through a knot-hole in the floor, it was easy to command a view of the room beneath, this being unceiled, with moulded beams and rafters. Festus had sat down on the hollow window-bench, and was continuing the statement of his wrongs. "If he only knew what he was sitting upon," she thought apprehensively, "how easily he could tear up the flap, lock and all, with his strong arm, and seize upon poor old Uncle Benjy's possessions." But he did not appear to know, unless he were acting, which was just possible. After a while he rose, and going to the table, lifted the candle to light his pipe. At the moment when the flame began diving into the bowl, the door noiselessly opened, and a figure slipped across the room to the window-bench, hastily unlocked it, withdrew the box, and beat a retreat. Anne in a moment recognised the ghostly intruder as Festus Derriman's uncle. Before he could get out of the room, Festus set down the candle and turned. "What, Uncle Benjy? Ha, ha! Here at this time of night?" Uncle Benjy's eyes grew paralysed, and his mouth opened and shut like a frog's in a drought, the action producing no sound. "What have we got here? A tin box? The box of boxes! Why, I'll carry it for you, uncle. I'm going home." No, thank ye, Festus. It's not heavy at all, thank ye," gasped the squireen. "Oh, but I must," said Festus, pulling at the box. "Don't let him have it, Bob," screamed the excited Anne through the hole in the floor. "No, don't let him," cried the uncle. "'Tis a plot. There's a woman at the window waiting to help him." Anne's eyes flew to the window, and she saw Matilda's face pressed against the pane. Bob, though he did not know whence Anne's command proceeded, obeyed with alacrity, pulled the box from the 2 relatives, and placed it on the table beside him. "Now look here, hearties, what's the meaning of this?" he said. "He's trying to rob me of all I possess," cried the old man. "My heartstrings seem as if they were going crack, crack, crack." At this instant the miller in his shirt-sleeves entered the room, having got thus far in his undressing when he heard the noise. Bob and Festus turned to him to explain, and when the latter had had his say, Bob added, "Well, all I know is that this box—" Here he stretched out his hand to lay it upon the lid for emphasis. But as nothing but thin air met his fingers where the box had been, he turned and found that the box was gone, Uncle Benjy having vanished also. Festus, with an imprecation, hastened to the door, but though the night was not dark, Farmer Derriman and his burden were nowhere to be seen. On the bridge Festus joined a shadowy female form, and they went along the road together, followed for some distance by Bob, lest they should meet with and harm the old man. But the precaution was unnecessary. Nowhere on the road was there any sign of Farmer Derriman or of the box that belonged to him. When Bob re-entered the house, Anne and Mrs. Loveday had joined the miller downstairs, and then, for the first time, he learnt who had been the heroine of Festus's lamentable story, with many other particulars of that yeoman's history which he had never before known. Bob swore that he would not speak to the traitor again, and the family retired. The escape of old Mr. Derriman from the annoyances of his nephew not only held good for that night, but for next day and for ever. Just after dawn on the following morning, a labouring man who had gone to his work saw the old farmer and landowner leaning over a rail in a mead near his house, apparently engaged in contemplating the water of a brook before him. Drawing near, the man spoke, but Uncle Benjy did not reply. His head was hanging strangely, his body being supported in its erect position entirely by the rail that passed under each arm. On after-examination, it was found that Uncle Benjy's poor withered heart had cracked and stopped its beating from damages inflicted on it by the excitements of his life, and of the previous night in particular. The unconscious carcass was little more than a light, empty husk, dry and fleshless as that of a dead heron found on a moor in January. But the tin box was not discovered with or near him. It was searched for all the week and all the month. The mill-pond was dragged, quarries were examined, woods were threaded, rewards were offered, but in vain. At length, one day in the spring, when the mill-house was about to be cleaned throughout, the chimney-board of Anne's bedroom, concealing a yawning fireplace, had to be taken down. In the chasm behind stood the missing deed-box of Farmer Derriman. Many were the conjectures as to how it had got there. Then Anne remembered that on going to bed on the night of the collision between Festus and his uncle in the room below, she had seen mud on the carpet of her room, and the miller remembered that he had seen footprints on the back staircase. The solution of the mystery seemed to be that the late Uncle Benjy, instead of running off from the house with his box, had doubled on getting out of the front door, entered at the back, deposited his box in Anne's chamber, where it was found, and then leisurely pursued his way home at the heels of Festus, intending to tell Anne of his trick the next day, an intention that was for ever frustrated by the stroke of death. Mr. Derriman's solicitor was a Casterbridge man, and Anne placed the box in his hands. Uncle Benjy's will was discovered within, and by this testament Anne's queer old friend appointed her sole executrix of his said will, and more than that, gave and bequeathed to the same young lady all his real and personal estate, with the solitary exception of 5 small freehold houses in a back street in Budmouth, which were devised to his nephew Festus, as a sufficient property to maintain him decently, without affording any margin for extravagances. Oxwell Hall, with its muddy quadrangle, archways, mullioned windows, cracked battlements, and weed-grown garden, passed with the rest into the hands of Anne. End of chapter 40. Recording by Simon Evers.
Chapter 41 of The Trumpet-Major. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or how to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Trumpet-Major by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 41. John marches into the night. During this exciting time, John Loveday seldom or never appeared at the mill. With the recall of Bob, in which he had been sole agent, his mission seemed to be complete. one midday before Anne had made any change in her manner of living, on account of her unexpected acquisition, Lieutenant Bob came in rather suddenly. He had been to Budmouth, and announced to the arrested senses of the family that the th Dragoons were ordered to join Sir Arthur Wellesley in the Peninsula. These tidings produced a great impression on the household. John had been so long in the neighborhood, either at camp or barracks, that they had almost forgotten the possibility of his being sent away, and they now began to reflect upon the singular infrequency of his calls since his brother's return. There was not much time, however, for reflection, if they wished to make the most of John's farewell visit, which was to be paid the same evening, the departure of the regiment being fixed for next day. A hurried valedictory supper was prepared during the afternoon, and shortly afterwards John arrived. He seemed to be more thoughtful and a trifle paler than of old, but beyond these traces, which might have been due to the natural wear and tear of time, he showed no signs of gloom. On his way through the town that morning, a curious little incident had occurred to him. He was walking past one of the churches when a wedding party came forth, the bride and bridegroom being Matilda and Festus Derriman. At sight of the Trumpet-Major, the yeoman had glared triumphantly. Matilda, on her part, had winked at him slyly, as much as to say, but what she meant, heavens knows. The Trumpet-Major did not trouble himself to think, and passed on without returning the mark of confidence with which she had favored him. Soon after John's arrival at the mill, several of his friends dropped in for the same purpose of bidding adieu. They were mostly the men who had been entertained there on the occasion of the regiment's advent on the Down, when Anne and her mother were coaxed in to grace the party by their superior presence, and their well-trained, gallant manners were such as to make them interesting visitors now as at all times. For it was a period when romance had not so greatly faded out of military life as it has done in these days of short service, heterogeneous mixing, and transient campaigns. When the esprit de corps was strong, and long experience stamped noteworthy professional characteristics even on rank and file, while the miller's visitors had the additional advantage of being picked men. They could not stay so long tonight as on that earlier and more cheerful occasion, and the final adieus were spoken at an early hour. It was no mere playing at departure, as when they had gone to Exonbury barracks, and there was a warm and prolonged shaking of hands all round. "You'll wish the poor fellows good-bye?" said Bob to Anne, who had not come forward for that purpose like the rest. "They are going away, and would like to have your good word." She then shyly advanced, and every man felt that he must make some pretty speech as he shook her by the hand. "Good-bye. May you remember us as long as it makes ye happy, and forget us as soon as it makes ye sad," said Sergeant Brett. "Good night. Health, wealth, and long life to ye," said Sergeant Major Wills, taking her hand from Brett. "I trust to meet ye again as the wife of a worthy man," said Trumpeter Buck. "We'll drink your health throughout the campaign, and so good-bye to ye," said Saddler Sergeant Jones, raising her hand to his lips. 3 others followed, with similar remarks, to each of which Anne blushingly replied as well as she could, wishing them a prosperous voyage, easy conquest, and a speedy return. But alas for that! Battles and skirmishes, advances and retreats, fevers and fatigues, told hard on Anne's gallant friends in the coming time. Of the 7 upon whom these wishes were bestowed, 5, including the Trumpet-Major, were dead men within the few following years, and their bones left to moulder in the land of their campaigns. John lingered behind. When the others were outside, expressing a final farewell to his father, Bob and Mrs. Loveday, he came to Anne, who remained within. "But I thought you were going to look in again before leaving," she said gently. "No, I find I cannot. Good-bye." "John," said Anne, holding his right hand in both hers, "I must tell you something. You were wise in not taking me at my word that day. I was greatly mistaken about myself. Gratitude is not love, though I wanted to make it so for the time. You don't call me thoughtless for what I did?" "My dear Anne," cried John, with more gaiety than truthfulness, "don't let yourself be troubled. What happens is for the best. Soldiers love here to-day and there to-morrow. Who knows that you won't hear of my attentions to some Spanish maid before a month is gone by? 'Tis the way of us, you know. A soldier's heart is not worth a week's purchase. Ha ha! Good-bye, good-bye." Anne felt the expediency of his manner, received the affection as real, and smiled her reply, not knowing that the adieu was for evermore. Then, with a tear in his eye, he went out of the door, where he bade farewell to the miller, Mrs. Loveday, and Bob, who said at parting, "It's all right, Jack, my dear fellow. After a coaxing that would have been enough to win 3 ordinary Englishwomen, 5 French, and 10 mulatters, she has to-day agreed to bestow her hand upon me at the end of 6 months. Good-bye, Jack, good-bye." The candle held by his father shed its waving light upon John's face and uniform, as with a farewell smile he turned on the doorstone, backed by the black night. And in another moment he had plunged into the darkness, the ring of his smart step dying away upon the bridge as he joined his companions in arms, and went off to blow his trumpet, till silenced for ever upon one of the bloody battlefields of Spain. End of chapter 41. Recording by Aaron Elliott, St. Louis, Missouri. End of The Trumpet-Major by Thomas Hardy.